Hello my friends, and welcome to the Curate Study for this week's Wondering Wednesday, which, unlike last week, we are actually recording on a Wednesday, which is quite unusual because we normally record a little bit early, or in the case of last week's Wondering Wednesday, a little bit late because we were busy doing other things. And we're continuing our series looking at the Bible. What is it? Who wrote it? How reliable is it? And we've worked our way through the Old Testament and the manuscripts that compose that. So if you're interested in the Old Testament, have a look back at a previous Wondering Wednesday. And last week we moved on to the New Testament, a bit of a conversation about authorship and arrangement, composition. And today I promised that we would look at the manuscripts that actually make up the New Testament. How reliable are they? How old is the oldest one we have? And how many copies do we have, for example? In other words, how do we know that what is actually written in the New Testament that we read today in our Bibles is reliable? Well, today, with the benefit of digital information, of course, you can research, copy, and resend stuff at a click of a button, can't you? And even 30 or 40 years ago, we had the benefit of the printing press, or typewriter, of course, which is like a modern version of the printing press almost. But when the New Testament was written, no such luxuries existed. So any document, parchment, manuscript had to be manually recopied. This made them both scarce, of course, and valuable because of the time required to copy one manuscript into another one. And they had to be manually circulated. If somebody wanted a copy of something, they had to commission a scribe to copy from an original, assuming one was available, and then it had to be physically transported from one place to another. So it's not at all surprising that many manuscripts, repeatedly transported between churches, for example, read and read and read over again, became damaged. So the problem is a little bit like this in some respects. If you think of a famous book of today, let's take, for example, Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. Now, if you looked at a previous Wondering Wednesday, you will know that we talked about that book and we examined the claims that the author, Mr. Brown, makes about Christian faith, particularly the life of Jesus in it. It's one of the most popular ones. I'd encourage you to look back and find it. Well, in the case of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, over 200 million copies have been published so far, which is a lot. And it's not surprising because actually, as I said in our Wondering Wednesday when we talked about Da Vinci Code, it's a brilliant book and I very much enjoyed it, and many of his other books. But if you have 200 million copies of a book, as time goes by, clearly you're going to have, even though some are lost, some are destroyed, some are worn out by repeated reading by avid readers, you will have quite a lot left going forward. So it's easy to imagine after many hundreds of years there'll still be quite a lot of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Codes squirreled away either in people's houses or in antiquarian bookshops, if such a thing still exists. So what about the Bible? Well, looking back into ancient history, many manuscripts that detail important events don't do so well when it comes to resilience. So, for example, Homer's Iliad, which is perhaps one of the most famous books in Greek history, which was written in about the 8th century BC, so comparable perhaps to some of the documents in the Old Testament. Today, we have 643 copies of it. Not 643 modern copies, but 643 ancient copies which remain. Or Julius Caesar's epic, The Gallic Wars, great famous for historians, written between 58 and 52 BC, so a lot more recent than Homer's Iliad. Of that, we only have 10 original ancient copies available to historians, and the earliest one we have was written almost 1,000 years after the original was written. So the original was written in around 58, 52 BC, but no copies exist from that original, and no copies exist for any copied script until 1,000 years after Caesar actually wrote his epic book. So for the New Testament, it's a little bit different. Scholars have 5,366 manuscripts to compare and draw information from, and these date from the 2nd or 3rd centuries AD. Now, to have such an abundance of copies from the New Testament, dating from within 70 years of when the originals were written, is astonishing. And it is one of the reasons it makes it very easy for theologians and historians and various other academics in related fields to have an abundance of information to study about the style of writing and the information contained in it. So the next question, of course, is, this is often brought up, if we accept, as we do, that in the time when these documents were originally written, everything had to be copied by hand, and so therefore would have been copied over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times, surely there are many, many mistakes in the Bible that we read today. Surely it's not a patch on what was originally written, because human error means that people do make mistakes in the copy of things, perhaps accidentally, of course, or sometimes deliberately. Well, scholars call errors where they find them variants. And if you imagine, as they have 5,366 different manuscripts to compare, they've got a lot of different work there to compare for variants on. They can compare each one of those against its sort of brother and sister copies. So when a single word is spelled differently, they call this a variant. And in those various different copies, there are in fact 10,000 places where variations occurs. Now that's a lot, isn't it? And when you hear that, when you think, blimey, there's 10,000 mistakes been made across the manuscripts that we have, that's a lot. Surely that means the Bible is incredibly unreliable. Well, no, it doesn't. And let me explain why. Because a variant is calculated as one single mistake. Okay, so if a variant is made in 1,000 different copies, that classes as 1,000 variants, even though it's the same mistake. I hope that makes sense. So actually, there are less than 40 places in the New Testament where we are not really certain what the original reading was, what the original manuscript said. Less than 40 places in all of the books contained in the New Testament. That's astonishing, really, when you think about it. And it just goes to show how accurate those early scribes were. And perhaps that was because they understood how important it was to convey the information that they had been given reliably. But what's even more interesting is, even if we did not have such good evidence, such original manuscripts dating back to such a recent time after the originals were written, we could still reconstruct almost the entire New Testament from quotations in the written works of church fathers who were commenting on and writing about the New Testament. Let me explain that a different way. There is such a wealth of literature, of manuscripts, of writing that were written by early Christians, early theologians, early church fathers, early church leaders, call them what you will, writing about the manuscripts that they had read and quoting from them. We could reconstitute the whole of the New Testament more or less from what they had written, even if we didn't have a single original manuscript. That's amazing, isn't it? I hope that's cleared up any ambiguity about how reliable the New Testament documents are that we read today. I hope you've enjoyed that, my friends. Now, for the next couple of weeks, there isn't going to be a Wondering Wednesday because, quite simply, I'm going on holiday, and so is my cameraman, Jack. So we need a bit of a break. So I hope you've enjoyed the series up to now. If you can think of something you'd like us to cover in a Wondering Wednesday, no matter how bizarre, and I'm open to some pretty weird stuff, please email me on fromthecuratesstudy@gmail.com. But either way, I hope you too get a good break over the summer and manage to recharge. Until we meet again, my friends, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. God bless.